Welcome to the Animation Industry Podcast. My name is Terry, and I'm currently drying some mugwort to make some dream-enhancing tea. This chat is with animation editor Stephanie Earley, who's worked on The Awesomes, Bob's Burgers, and Central Park. In our chat, she shares how she got her start as an assistant editor and worked her way up to lead, as well as the ins and outs of being an editor, including what software studios use, who she reports to, how she makes cuts, and how editors are hired. But first, remember in last week's episode, I mentioned Magic Mind sent me a 2-week batch of their productivity drink shots, which is supposed to be more energy boosting, creativity enhancing, and stimulating than coffee. Well, I have been drinking a shot every day instead of a cup of coffee, which is a little tough because I do like coffee. And here are my thoughts. I'm actually very surprised at how fast the shots work. Like, I feel jittery and pretty awake almost immediately. Like today, after I took the shot, I ended up doing my laundry and the dishes and a bunch of other chores. So I guess it is very productivity enhancing. But I do miss holding a hot cup of liquid that I slowly sip in my hand. So there is that. And I've also noticed that I just stay kind of animating, focused for longer, which is, I'm not sure if it's a placebo effect or it's the drink. Because, I am conscious of doing this challenge, but I'm excited to see how the rest of next week goes. And of course, if you're interested in giving Magic Mind a try as well, they're offering 20% off for one-time purchases and 40% off for subscribers of their drinks to listeners of this podcast. Just go to www.magicmind.co/animation and use the code animation20. And I've included the links and more details of the offer in the description of this chat, so please go check them out. And now, without further ado, let's jump in. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Good. Hi, Terry. How are you?
I'm good. You just told me before this chat that you have to go back into the office for the first time in many years. Tell me what it was like being an editor on Central Park entirely from your living room for the last couple of years.
For the last couple of years. Yes, I am going back hopefully Monday, maybe later in the week, depending on the technical setup that they get going. But my husband, who is also an animation editor, we've been home working in our dining room back to back.
Like your backs are touching.
Like almost our desks face each other. Or in each other's Zoom chats all the time. And since March 13th, 2020, they sent us home and they were like, oh, we're going to shut down for a week. We don't really know how everything's going to happen. I had cut 201 for Central Park, the animatic for 201 in the office. And I was prepping 202 and we got sent home. And so all of season 2 and all of season 3 of Central Park has been cut from my dining room / office.
That's crazy. So I'm not an editor, but I imagine it's a very almost collaborative process where you're in touch with the director and the producers and the, I don't know, storyboard and music and voice and everything all the time. Is that so how is it doing it? Like, are you excited to go back into the office because it'll be much easier, or did you kind of reach a groove state?
Well, we're doing hybrid, so I'm excited to have the flexibility. I'm a mom, so being able to work from home if our nanny is sick or if we have to take our children somewhere, it's nice to have flexibility and then to be able to come home at a specific time and do bedtime and then finish up work if I have to. So I do like the flexibility to be able to do some from home, but I am so desperate to get back into the office where it is quiet.
And get me away from my screaming kids and my partner.
Get me away from my children in the most loving way possible. But we've been having all of our edit sessions over Zoom, which is fantastic. But you can always you can always tell that something's going to be different in the room. And my show was super chatty. My husband's show was less chatty at first, and they got to know each other, and now they're more chatty. But the showrunners of both of our shows are writers on Bob's, so they are really good friends. So sometimes we would be having dueling Zooms, and my showrunners would be like, "Hey," like through coming out of my iPad into my husband's iPad, and they responded, and it's like
Oh my goodness.
there's a lot going on, and so it was really complicated, and we got some scheduling things worked out. Once we were going to be home for a while, they're like, okay, we can't schedule them on the same day to have these long edit sessions because they just take so long. So we got some of that worked out, but
Wow.
yeah, like he'll have he had a lock today, and I was like doing work just with my headphones, and I'm like, it needs to just be a little bit quieter.
Oh no.
Just I need to be able to like get some stuff done. And then he says the same about me. Like ours are really chatty. Ours are like super chatty. And he's just like, seriously, they like went off on this tangent. It's like, I'm working. I'm just like, I'm mocking up
Yeah,
what they
we're
want.
making money so our kids can like it's fine. Okay, that's hilarious. I'm just picturing your Zoom participants talking at each other, which is like some kind of meta hilarious situation. But I'm wondering, you worked from home during the pandemic, and the pandemic and Corona and Zoom opened up a lot of remote jobs for other people. For instance, like I'm animating on a project that's actually out of Texas, but I'm in Toronto, which wouldn't have been a thing a couple of years ago. So how
Yeah.
common is it for editors to be hired remotely after kind of this experience? Or do you still kind of have to, pick up your bags and move to the studio that you'll be working for?
I definitely think remote, if not full remote, definitely a hybrid is going to be the norm. There was already workflows in, I mean, it really just depends on like software and stuff, but like Blackmagic had a really, really good remote workflow before the pandemic. And now they've sort of improved on that one specifically. It sort of depends on like the size of the show as well. Like you can easily cut a doc with a smaller workflow in cloud-based storage remotely, and so a lot of that is happening. Smaller shows are able to hire people remote. Also, people like I'm in Los Angeles, so people who lived in Los Angeles and their shows went full remote and aren't coming back, they can move if they want. A lot of people have. There's some people on our show that have moved full-time, sold property in Los Angeles and gave up leases and are just like, I'm gonna live somewhere else, and they do, and they have to be on LA hours for work. Typically, is like the norm is you work the hours of the studio you're working for.
Yeah.
For a lot of more specific jobs, like editorial has very specific deadlines, but we also have large expanses of time where we just have to work and like move forward doing things like the actual editing. Obviously, as an animator, you totally get that. That kind of work can be done sort of whenever we want, but like the deadline doesn't change. We have almost all of our storyboard artists for, well, so like the side of Bento Box that I'm in is the side run by Lauren Bouchard, or EP'd by Lauren Bouchard, who show runs and created Bob's Burgers. And like almost all of the storyboard artists on this side of Bento Box are going to be full remote. We have a couple of animators that did want to come into the office, probably for a faster internet connection, but so many people have chosen to either do hybrid, which for us is 2 days a week, or fully remote. And we beefed up our Slack. I mean, they even do, like company bingo over Zoom to like keep people engaged. And, it's just really nice that you can now have an option if like living in Los Angeles doesn't work for you.
Totally.
There's
I mean,
something
there's
you
so
can
many
do and
people
keep
that I've
your
talked
job.
to where the only option when they were growing up was to move to LA. So they like, but
Yeah.
like busted tables or whatever that is. Is that the right saying?
Yeah, bus tables. Yeah,
Bus
bus tables,
tables
waited on
until
tables.
they made
Yeah,
it. And now
working in a
like
restaurant.
people these days are just like, oh, I just go online and apply and somebody hires me, which is interesting. Okay, so congratulations on going back and getting a hybrid. That's exciting. Hopefully it happens for you because it's what you want. But take me back. You started in, well, you were born and then somehow you became an
Yes, I
editor
was.
for things. How did you get into this in the first place?
I I mean, I'm one of those people that was like, oh, I love TV, I love entertainment, but that could never be my career. Like, you just never. I was born in Florida. I
So a
grew up in
normal
Tennessee.
person who's like, I like
Normal
TV.
person. I'm just like, I love it. People do those jobs, but like, there's no way that I would ever do those jobs. Like, no, I'm gonna work in a bank or I'm gonna do blah. I just sort of assumed
Yeah.
my life would be something else. And I went to University of Georgia, and I graduated in '06. So I was there before. It now has a very robust entertainment media studies program. I was there before that.
You were the founder.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. I like to say that too. Um, I'm a telecom major. Like, that's what we were called. You either were broadcast or you're a telecom. And broadcast, you wanted to be on camera, and telecom, you didn't want to be on camera or you didn't get into broadcast.
So how did telecom lead to
Um,
you working at a bank? So
I I didn't know. The bank idea was mostly in like middle school or high school, when I was like watching Buffy and Felicity and Dawson's Creek and being like, oh my gosh, I love TV. I was a full on teeny bopper. Like, I perfect age for it. Like, loved everything about appointment television at that age, which was like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Dawson's Creek. And then the OC. That was like the sort of the next um stage of that. But like, it was, you could not tear me away from the television at that exact specific time to watch those shows. Loved them. Um, but yeah, I just had no idea. And then when I got to college, I was like, oh, what do I want to do? I had no idea. So I was just like, maybe I'll do journalism. Cool. Then journalism became production 1101, and production 1101. I was like, I mean, they have classes for this. Like, people have to do these jobs, right? Like, I'll just keep doing this. It'll be fine. I completely thought I was actually going to end up as a news director, because our news source broadcast program sort of fed into CNN in Atlanta. A lot of people got jobs, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll be a news director. It'll be great. I did not get a job as a news director in Nashville when I had to move home right after college. And I could not, despite all of my applying, couldn't find any job in news in Atlanta. So I waited tables in Nashville. I lived with my parents. And about a year after we graduated, a friend of mine from college, there were like four of us who did telecom, just became really good friends. She was like, so we had talked about like moving to Los Angeles in 5 years. Do you just want to go now? And I was like, yes, I do. I'm waiting tables. I could be waiting tables in Los Angeles. Like, I can do that. I'm not doing anything here. So about 2 weeks after that conversation, packed the car and just like drove. And I got a internship during the day, because I was thinking, I can be a producer. I can do that. I'm very organized. That is so not my skill set. Yeah. Ultimately, I found that out. But I had an internship with a producer, and my first job was night logging for The Real World, which is basically watching footage that has been laid to tape and logging what happens in the footage every minute. It's like, watch a minute of footage, type in like the Excel FileMaker Pro Pilotware software, what happens, next cell, like that, just for 9 hours at night.
That sounds. What is that used for? This is raw footage. It's not like.
Yes, it's
okay.
It's been laid to tape. Some of it's been like it's like if they went out, if the cast went out. I was at Real World Hollywood, so like if the cast went out drinking, partying, they had like all the cameras going. They probably, there's a bat cave in the Real World house, and they like go through the footage there, and like if they're out for 4 hours but then nothing really happens for 2 of those hours, they might only lay off 2 of those hours to tape for us to log, and the others just sort of like, maybe they eventually come in or they get digitized, but they're not like
So,
what they think
so
would be
you're
part of
telling
the
me
story.
every reality show has, and maybe more, has some student, some poor student in a cave watching every minute of footage and typing out exactly what happens so that somewhere an editor can be like, where's the drama? And there's like a highlight on cell 5,000. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
that's-
Because I always wonder
yeah.
how they go through hours and hours and hours of footage and don't lose their minds. They pay somebody to lose their minds for them.
They pay someone to lose their minds, and like it was called logging. It has become story producing. So like what we were creating went to story producers, and we had to use very specific buzzwords. So every person has a code name. So like one of the cast members' names was Sarah. Her code was SS. So like they could just do a search for like SS if they needed an SS storyline or whatever.
Gotcha.
So like we had to put very specific buzzwords. Excuse me. So everything could be sorted
Yeah.
in basically an Excel spreadsheet in these cells. Nowadays, APs and story producers, like the loggers, it's like a first job that you get at any reality company. And there are now even some story producers that are on Avid on non-union shows, and they like go through footage, they do all the markers, they make string outs for the editors, like just like
Wow.
tons of footage to go through. The editor doesn't have to do it. I mean, I worked on a show that had like 5 boats. Each boat had 3 cameras, and the cameras were going for 24 hours a day. Like that's just a lot of stuff to like
So you're
go
like,
through.
so and so makes a sandwich. It's peanut butter and jam.
Yeah.
Drops sandwich, picks up sandwich, eats it anyways. Starts
Yeah.
a fight. Okay, wow. So
You'd
okay,
be a
so
great
you're in
logger.
LA. You got your dream job, and that's the end of the story. How did you move from that into editing specifically? I mean, it sounds like you're kind of at the bottom rung of where editing starts. How did you make the move up to assistant
Was
editor?
so I um after that season of Real World ended, I applied around to be a post PA, and I got a job at a big reality company that did the show Ghost Hunters. And I was a post PA there, like in general, for a little bit, under like different post departments. And I didn't know Avid. I knew Final Cut, and I knew some Premiere, but this was before Premiere was what it is now. It was not. It was like definitely third, not user intuitive. No one really
It's still
liked
not
it,
user
but I knew
intuitive.
how to do it. Yeah, that's a fair point. Um, so, but I didn't know Avid, and so I was like, well, before I can be an assistant editor, I got to learn Avid. So I started making friends with the assistant editors, and whatever they could teach me, I would absorb.
Yeah.
And I made friends with the assistant editor on Ghost Hunters, who is now one of my best friends. She's my neighbor. Our kids play together, and she taught me Avid and was just like, "This is what you have to know." She had gone to USC and majored in editing. She knew it. She was classically trained. Awesome. Learned it from her. And she pulled me on as digitizer for Ghost Hunters. And then I just worked my way up until I was editing Ghost Hunters.
How long did that take?
And 5 years.
5 years.
5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
And it
that
was a
is,
small show. So,
but still,
but
five
it is
years is
still
a long
fast.
time to spend in your career. Was that entire time you were like actively working to the editing role, or were you just like, let's
Yeah.
see where this takes me? Like, I'm in TV and I didn't think I would be like, tell me what you were thinking and determined to do during those 5 years. That's a long time.
Yeah. It's a long time, but it's like kind of short. If you're to ask a lot of people like how long did it take to go from AE to editor, sometimes it could take like 10. It just sort of depends on like where you are. I didn't move around. I always justified that it was better for like my mental health to not have to look for a job every like 8 to 12 weeks than always get paid like whatever the top rate was. I was like, I would rather know a paycheck was coming and I'm very comfortable in what I'm making. I love my job. I like the people I work with. I don't want to have to look for work constantly. This is
Yeah.
very like stress on my mental health. So I stayed at a company for 5 years when a lot of people jump around in reality. And so I was able to really establish myself on Ghost Hunters, and I worked my way up to was cutting I was cutting scenes, I was cutting web material, I was associate editing for like a year, and there was an extra spot. And so I asked, I was like, can I do it? And they're like, sure. And so I cut a couple of episodes of Ghost Hunters. And then I was like last in, so first out. I knew that. And I was sort of like, okay, so this is ending. I have to go look around at other companies. And I went to a housewarming party
But
with
sorry,
my then
wait, wait,
boyfriend.
wait, wait. Okay. Maybe I'll come back to you, but continue the story.
So I went to a housewarming party,
Yeah.
as I was, thinking of how I was going to find my next job. And at that party was a producer that I was introduced to. And she and I, like, love at first sight. This woman is like still a really good friend of mine. She is hilarious. We just clicked. And she was like, oh my gosh, like, you're hilarious. And I was like, thank you. I also think I'm hilarious. And she was like, I think you'd be a really good fit on this team that I'm putting together for this show called The Awesomes. And I was like, I have never worked in animation. I knew that it was, so the housewarming party was for an animation editor, Chris Fitzgerald, who was actually cut the first season of Central Park. So I knew this was an animation, and my then boyfriend at the time, now husband, had just gotten a job on Bob. So this was like bento box work people. And I was like, I've never worked in animation. I just want to like lead with that. So, I'm not trying to dupe you, but I absolutely want this job. Like, what do I have to do? And basically she was like, do you know Abbott? And I was like, yes. That is like the easiest question you could have asked me. That is like the only thing I know. If you tell me that animation is cut on Abbott, like, cool. That's all I know. And she was like, that's all you need. Like, are you willing to be an assistant editor? And I was like, yes. Even though I'd been editing, I was like, to change genres can be a difficult jump. So I was like, if somebody's offering a change in genres, like, I would love that. Any experience I can get, I would love to do. And so she was like, cool, let me run this up the food chain and you come in for an interview. And I was like, okay. And then I got the job. Like, and the other producer, Janelle, who's an EP on Bob's, and I work very closely with her now. Like, I met with her and Srani, and we just all clicked. And wow. I'm still working for Janelle now. Like, it's amazing.
That is quite
so that was
random how you randomly meet somebody at although, the house party was for an editor, your boyfriend was an editor, you can assume there's going to be some people in the industry
some people there.
So you could have called this an industry event, housewarming, but no, still, that's crazy that a conversation just hit it off and you're a nice person and it worked out. That's amazing. Yeah. Okay. I want to dial it back just because the question I was going to ask you was, those 5 years where you were going towards editing and then you finally got editing, how did that moment feel where you're like, I'm responsible for this episode. I'm not just, associate or whatnot. Like, how did that feel?
It's like hard to put into words because I was always like, oh, I want to be an editor.
Yeah.
I wasn't ever picky on like what I wanted to edit. My husband was always like, he's very like specific, like content things. He's like, editing this would make me happy. I don't want to edit this. He's more specific on like the content. I never was. I was like, I love editing reality. I mean, the thing about Ghost Hunters is like, we had story producers, but we didn't have the story producers like I was a logger. So we did have to watch all the footage. And it was a lot less footage for Ghost Hunters because they're very specific on what they filmed. But like watching the footage, meeting with the other editors, looking at the big wall of note cards and like figuring out the episode, like you can't duplicate that. You can't beat it. It's just like, I don't know. It was great. It was like such a rush. And then people just like left me alone in my edit bay because I was editing. When I was the assistant editor, it was like constant barrage of people. Everyone needs something. It's like, someone emailing me, someone knocking on my door. Everyone needs something. Everything's about prioritizing and figuring out like how to balance fully supporting a team at the time of like 10 to 14 editors, 4 story execs, an EP, and then whatever the network needed. So it was a massive team, and everything was just constantly go, 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 go. And I became an editor. And that first Monday after we had like our editors meeting, and we sort of assigned out what we were going to watch, and they're like, okay, we'll go watch it. We'll meet on Friday. I was like, that's it? Like, I just get to go sit in my bay for 9 hours and like create.
That sounds awesome.
It was an amazing feeling.
Yeah, amazing. I'm wondering also, now that you're an editor, a full-blown editor, some people have the opinion that you can be like naturally talented and gifted. Do you think you had to go through those 5 years experience to really understand how to become a good editor and know kind of what is needed and expected and to make a good show? Or can you kind of jump right into it from, I don't know, you're editing your own stuff on like YouTube and whatnot?
It's definitely possible to be a natural. It's definitely, I mean, like there's a flow and a pace.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it can just click, and then you just like know what to do. Sometimes it's a happy accident where you end up like, putting a cut. It's all sort of a mix, but there are things to learn. And like my biggest growth is when I like fully understood the tools that I was working with, and like, what can Avid do? Once I figured out like what Avid could do, I could make it work for me. And it's not just a choice of where you put a cut, but it's how you build everything out in animation, especially because we layer everything. Like every single one of my shots had multiple takes where I picked and chose, because we were so desperate to not have to send retakes. Like Central Park just didn't have the resources to be able to retake everything that we wanted to. So we had to like pick and choose in how we used our animator resources. And so like all of the shots, they were like, Stephanie, do you think you can fix this? And I was like, yeah, let's try it. So all the ones that I was tasked to fix were just, mats and animats and masks all on top of each other. And so it's like, I can be a technically good editor because I know what tools I'm using. But something that's sort of harder to teach is, where do you put a cut on a sting out? Where do you, like, how many breaths do you need before you change scenes? Like there's you just have to feel it sometimes, and it's not, it's very possible to learn.
What's a sting
out? It's also possible to be a natural. Like if you're changing scenes and you have like a little music cue, it's like bum.
Oh, I see.
So it's like,
so what would you say are the main skill sets of, being a really sought after, amazing, people want to work with you editor? Then you mentioned, Avid got you your job in the first place. So
yeah,
being familiar with the tools, and then the sense of timing, and like, what else is on your toolkit that people are like, we gotta work with Stephanie?
Hopefully people are saying that. In my opinion, if you are an editor and you only like want to do wanting to do like one like kind of show versus being able to sort of like be a chameleon,
Yeah,
two very different things. Like if
like
you're
I only do horrors,
only specialists, I can only do very specific things. Like I would always want someone like that to be able to broaden their toolbox, so to speak. But you could be a chameleon, and it's like, sometimes jobs are like, oh, you need reality shows do this all the time. It's like, oh, you need food show experience. It's like, or competition show experience. And you don't really need a lot of experience in stuff like that if you're willing to like do the research, like watch a lot of food shows, and like you can understand the pacing of them. Like it's not hard. Sometimes they want people to hit the ground running, so I can understand that. But like, animation versus reality versus scripted features, like an editor can do any of it because editors are chameleons. It's just a matter of like direction, first of all. Like, tell me what you want and I can make it. Like, you want me to make, a scene in Central Park, a horror movie? cool, I can do that. Like with the current footage, like I can do it. I can darken it. I can, add in my own stings. I can pace it differently for a different mood. Like you can do that because editing allows you
Yeah.
to do that.
Um,
So I don't know. It's like being a chameleon is probably like the best thing. And I really hope that I can do that. I spend a lot of time practicing pacing and watching the shows back. Because a show like Central Park, for example, like it's an ensemble cast and everybody brings their own energy to it. And every character is, it's like specific in what they bring to the radio play, which is just the dialogue exchange. And you sometimes don't know what you have until you start listening to final dialogue. So, I mean, we pace the show in animatic. We pace the show when we get color. We pace the show when we rewrite it in color. We pace the show at all these different places. And then we put in ADR and like the whole show could change. Like scenes could change. You put in frames like of breath in a performance and it can change like the mood of something so dramatically. You just don't know until you have it in front of you. And it's one of the most fun things.
Totally. I mean, something you said was interesting to me about the chameleon thing. Like, I'm sure you have a knack for, say, like, maybe you're better at writing comedy or editing comedy than you are like action or something. How do you study the different genres of TV shows and movies and pacing? Like, do you just watch things and you're like, cut, okay, cut. Oh, they cut on that. Okay, now they cut. Like, is that how you watch media?
I mean, yeah, a lot of it. Yeah.
So like you have a horror scene coming up and you'll like watch a horror movie and be like, okay, this is how they cut it. Like a slow burn on this shot and then like a fast,
Yep.
Okay. Interesting. Also, I had another question and just escaped my mind, but other than just cuts, what are the other tools available to you? Because everything is kind of given to you, the ADR, the music, like you're like, is cutting the only kind of physical task that you do? Maybe you can explain the editing process a little bit more and what you do.
Yeah. Technically, yes, but it's a lot. It's like, it's yes, but no. Editors are creative voices in their own way. And sometimes it depends on the showrunner. Sometimes it depends on the EP. It depends on the company that you're working for. It depends on the show, sort of what level editing can elevate to in the creative process. Animation lends itself to a lot of that. For the most part, I mean, animatics for television are short. If you were to ask someone who cut a Pixar movie where they do most of their work, their answer is in animatic. They're in animatic for like 3 years, 2 years, and then they get color, and the animation is so intricate and so beautiful and so specific, and it takes so long to do that you have to know exactly what you plan to do. And obviously there are rewrites and changes even in the biggest movies, but it's still, even if you rewrite 4 massive scenes in a movie like Frozen, so much of that is still there and that animation can be used. Our animatic process is like 8 weeks for an episode.
Wow.
And that's 8 weeks of the artist's work on, like, the artists have to draw everything. They have to like figure out from thumbs to story, like story and thumbs, and storyboard it out. And then, so they get a couple weeks of storyboards. It comes to editing paces, figures out a couple of things. Sometimes too many poses are used. And when it goes to timing after editorial, timers they will try and hit every pose. So like if you have your hand here and then you have the whole point is like to get here. But if there's like all of these in betweens already, timers will try and hit all of those. And sometimes the animation can get a little wonky. So we all want each department to be able to fully do their job. So as editors, we'll be like, well, let's maybe like remove 2 of those 5. So they only have 3 poses they have to hit. And then maybe the timers can make that movement feel more organic.
Hmm.
We'll remove poses, fix technical things. Every show or movie has, do's and don'ts for the style, like what style they choose to do. How do they do their eyes? How do they do surprise face? Everyone has the head turns. All of these things can be like really, really specific and intricate. And then we call technicals on props. We have to make like, I'll be raising red flags and be like, the artists don't have the correct prop here. Can we provide the correct asset so that they can do their job? Because I notice it across 4 sequences that the violin that Birdie has only has 2 strings instead of 3. But I see all the sequences and not everyone else does. Editor
Right.
sees everything in context. So I can, sort of track some of these things to communicate and make sure that everybody has what they need to do their job. So that's sort of editing in animatic. Then we do like the final pacing. Then a whole bunch of technical stuff happens. We send it to track read and timing, and all of our amazing design and background painters do their jobs, and we ship overseas. When it comes back, we do another massive pacing pass. And we change things. And like I basically get to do what I want on my rough color. Sort of, if I think something came back and I really wanted a different thing, if I want to like push in, do close-ups, change a couple of shots, I sort of can do whatever I want.
Nice.
Understandably within reason, but usually like since I cut my own animatics, I know what I'm expecting. An editor that didn't cut their own animatics may look at it and be like, I would have done a couple of different things here, and maybe they changed more things. But yeah, so I basically had carte blanche to do, except for cutting words. Nobody cuts words in television because the words are what we're here for. Like the writers wrote amazing words. It's an awesome radio play.
Yeah.
And like we leave cutting words to the writers. Like you guys know how your jokes want to fall. So then after we do a rough color, there's a rewrite. Basically just try and punch up jokes, make sure things are still funny. It's overseas for like 12 weeks. So you have this script that was written now almost 6 months ago, boarded, sent overseas, and now we're getting it back. We're like, is that joke still funny? Is that we all agree that still slaps? Is that we all good? Okay, fine. And then we sort of do that. So they get a rewrite done, we get it, and then we have to conform. So when the rewrite comes in, I basically have to be like, can I make picture work? Let's try it. Sometimes I need new shot setups, look at sort of what we have and assess if it'll work. If we need something bigger, then we will talk about it in a big edit session that comes next. And then we have that big edit session, and that is where we lock it for content. That is like all the words. Those words are the ones that we are going to air. Picture has to catch up. After we do that, we go into a lock after we have ADR all recorded, because that content lock is what we call it. Solidifies the words, and that's what they send to record. And we record ADR for anyone that we didn't pick up, or if we needed new things because of a rewrite. Then we lock, and then we send it to retake animation. And that is where our awesome in-house animators basically conform things. They make adjustments, they merge all the shots. They just like do everything that we need them to do without having to send it overseas. They're so talented. And then we package it all up and deliver it. So editorial does a lot of like contextualizing on our Tickleboat shows. Like I said before, we're the only ones that see everything as a cut, other than the creatives who are thinking about the words. So I'm making sure stuff tracks from shot to shot, because animators will only work by shot, and so our in-house animators may get assigned a shot, and then someone else is assigned the shot right next to it. And if we haven't told them how stuff has to hook up, because they don't know, they're not looking at it in context. So we have to provide them with everything that we can so that they can work fast and as well as possible. So I do a lot of that, and
Wow.
on top of
What a
regular
process.
stuff.
I've heard kind of that editors have like the most stable kind of job in the animation industry. Is that true because you're there for so long and you can control the process a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Central Park was 3 seasons. I started March of 19, and I've
Okay.
never taken a hiatus.
Perfect. Wow.
Never.
Great.
Yeah, it's
Amazing.
just sort of
How do
keeps
you
on going. And it takes a year to do one episode. About like that's about how long it takes in full to cut one episode of an animated television show.
Wow, that's insane. I didn't think it was that long. How do you make tough decisions along the way where you're like, I have to fit this in 22 minutes, but I've got 24 minutes and, everything is perfect. The humor is great. How do you squish down something? How do you make those tough decisions?
Those tough decisions usually fall to the showrunner
Mm,
or the writer showrunner. In the case of CP, our writer's room, we were picked up in specifically, so our writer's room wasn't there, and it was just the showrunners doing all of the writing creative decisions. The If you get to a point where you're like a minute and a half, 2 minutes over, like words have to be cut. It's just how it has to happen. And um sometimes those words are cut in an edit session, and we can talk about things and track exposition and what's really needed. And other times those are cut on paper, and we'll receive paper cuts and take a pass at take a pass at the timeline and see how much time that got us back and where we sort of stand. And hopefully, when we get to lock to time, it's still as good as it was
fair,
even when
fair,
it was,
fair. How many,
without
how
those extra
many,
minutes.
how many editors are working on Central Park at one time? You
It
and
was just me.
just you.
It was just
Just so
me.
you're the
Yeah.
editor for every single episode. Wow, that's
Yeah.
some crazy responsibility. Are you just in your emotions constantly because you have to like feel out moments throughout the show? Like, like get into like this is a humorous moment or this is a scary moment or a serious moment. Are you just like, are you emotionally exhausted sometimes?
Sometimes there are definitely the days where it's emotionally exhausting. My husband sometimes makes fun of me because I can emotionally compartmentalize extremely well. But sometimes episodes like hit differently. There's an episode of Central Park. It's the 8th episode, which I think it drops this Friday. It's a really emotional episode, and it's about race, and it's not something that CP had ever really touched on before, but it's a biracial family. It was very important. And deciding and figuring out emotional moments during this, and like really allowing Leslie Odom Jr.'s performance to lead so much of this. That was when we were all a little in our emotions during that, because we were like, we're a funny family show. It's a very serious subject matter. How do we approach this subject matter of factly, emotionally appropriately, but still have the humor that Central Park yearns for, and like what our audience comes to watch every week. So how do we sort of make that balance? And so that was a tough episode, and we were all sort of feeling a lot of things constantly, and everything was sort of changing on a dime. And then there was an episode that's 310. I think it's still airing as 310. They are production order and airing order is sometimes out of order. But it is where the family becomes super fans of a K-pop group. And I don't think I have ever laughed so much while working on like an actual conform, where I'm like, there's new audio coming in. Everything was just like, oh, that's a funny one. just like putting stuff in. I was like, oh, I know what picture I want to use for that. Or, everything was so funny. Then watching it down again at the end, everything was still funny. And, that one was the family really stayed together. So it was funny, but it was still emotional in how they all like supported each other in this like crazy fan dumb. And then the music was just awesome. It's just really
amazing.
Money Candy Peed in My Bathroom is the name of a song in that episode. So Money Candy is the band.
I see. Okay. It sounds like you are having such a time in this role, thinking back to early days, Stephanie, just watching Buffy and wanting to work in a bank and then ending up in telecom and then reality TV and now animation. Have you arrived? Is this your thing now, or is there something still that you're yearning to work towards? Like,
oh my gosh, I don't even know what more I could want, to be perfectly honest. Like, I love my job. I love working in animation. I didn't know anything about animation, obviously. And
yeah, do you have to know anything about animation to edit animation at all? Like, no.
I personally don't think that you do. I don't think that you do, because that's how I got there. But my assistant, my assistant editor, Matt Parcone, I knew him from working in reality. I knew how organized he was. I knew how good he was at his job. So I was like, this is an asset. We have to hire him. We hired him a week before we went home for the pandemic. I had a week in person to teach him the language of animation, because that's really all that's different.
Yeah. What does that mean? So, you're in reality and now you're animation. What is the language of animation? Why is it such a big jump?
Knowing what people are talking about first and foremost. Everything is very frame oriented. We talk about feet and frames and how stuff has to ship, and like, oh, it goes to track, read, and timing. And, these are shots, these are scenes, these are, it's just like, this is what takes are. Like, all of these things that are not normal language and how things are referenced. When an assistant editor in animation cuts and retakes, what we would call it in unscripted is overcutting footage. That's how you would say it. It's like, oh, we have new footage, we overcut it. So that means you have to be frame accurate, go to the frame, go to this frame, you're overcutting it. It's the exact same thing, but it's a new version of it.
So the language is totally different. Is the timing or anything like that changed too much?
A little bit. Animation, it takes longer to make an episode than reality. Reality, you're looking at 8 weeks to rough cut, maybe a week to 2 weeks, depending on the network, for a fine cut. And then you get to a lot cut maybe 2 weeks later. So you're looking at 12 weeks until it has to go to online. You're looking at like 52 weeks in animation before something, gets to those parts of post-production, just under 45 weeks before it gets to a part. So there's definitely, every milestone has urgency in animation, because our schedules are so jam-packed and there's so much that has to get done and so many departments are affected. So things have to stay on schedule. But I have never once in animation been asked to like stay until midnight to make sure that something got finished and done, because somebody was definitely watching it at 12:15 a.m.
Yeah.
No, like, someone will watch it tomorrow morning, so just finish it tomorrow morning. Like, it's not,
So what's keeping you in animation? Would you ever go back to live action?
Not unless I couldn't find an animation job. I
gotcha. So you're living the dream right now, it sounds like.
I love it. I am. I do.
Amazing.
It fulfills both sides of my brain. Like, there's a creative side, which is the editing side, and then the organizational, see everything in context, communicate with all departments, sort of like oversee a lot of these things coming in and out, because everything goes in and out of editorial. So you have to like be able to communicate. Like, that is this like other side of my brain that is really satisfied by animation.
Yeah. Wow. So, like, what's next for you now that you are in heaven?
Living the dream. I don't know. I'm on Bob's for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And then I am slotted for another project in March, which I don't know a ton about, but it is an adaptation of a novel, which will be something new and more stylized. And then I don't know how long that will take, but after that, who knows? I would love to get onto sort of a long running series. That would be fun to be able to like really learn from every season. You know, Central Park season 1 was so hard, and it was made so hard because we didn't know what we were doing. We were trying, it was like so revolutionary to have a musical. No one knew what it took to make an animated musical. So we had to like figure it out.
Yeah.
So it was messy. And then season 2, also messy, trying to figure it out, but learned a little bit from season 1. So we're learning every season. By season 3, we were running so smoothly because we had learned and like made adjustments and like figured stuff out and set protocols and boundaries and all these things that are necessary when you are in chaos. And the thought of being on a series that, you know, goes for a while and be able to like learn and, you know, evolve together with a team is great. I would love that.
So would
I mean,
you,
if someone wanted me to cut a Pixar movie, I would totally do it too. But like, you know,
of course, yeah, of course. If anybody's listening on Pixar,
of course.
here we go. But you know, you've kind of stayed in
animation.
adult animation and entertainment, and well, Ghost Hunters is like kids. But like, what if you were offered Blue's Clues, which has, you know, I don't know, 1,000 seasons, and it's like a preschool show? Would you be like, yeah, that's for me too, or like you kind of like dealing with more adult themes and comedy and whatnot?
I mean, I think, yeah, like if Bento didn't have a job for me and Blue's Clues did, I would totally do it.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not.
It's interesting to me that you say that, like, you know, what it
Yeah.
makes sense that your job is easier once there's like a formula that's been established for a long time that you can just kind of like follow. I'm sure it's challenging, but also kind of fun to start something from scratch. But you know, maybe as we're wrapping up, let me just ask you this: if you were to fast track your career, you know, like you're dropped in the middle of a desert. With all the knowledge of this past editorial lifetime, where would you start to fast track yourself to this position? Just for like, you know, somebody listening and they want to get into editing, or they're in the process of getting into editing, what would you focus on?
Oh, focus on. I mean, I would. That is like, oh, that's like, no, it's like, if I had all the knowledge, what would I focus on? I would focus on meeting people. I would focus on networking.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying for me. I'm terrible at networking. I'm not good at it. I'm very, very.
Is there a way that you network that's easier for you now that you've discovered?
No, nothing is easy, but I just force myself to do it.
Well, listen, you're on a podcast right now. Hi.
I know I am on a podcast, which was like great. And I love doing it, but I'm like so nervous all the time. I'm on a panel and I'm like on a panel again tomorrow. I just like, it's all, I don't know. It's all very.
You're putting yourself out there, which I think is important. Yeah. So networking is number one, like meeting people. Yeah.
Networking is number one. Yeah, because the thing for me is like, I would focus on finding the company I wanted to work for. Like, who do you know at a company? What do they say work-life balance is like? What do they say, you know, job security is like? What do your days look like? Finding the company, I think, is so important, because there are companies that don't believe in work-life balance, or there's some companies that say that they believe in work-life balance, but they don't. And like figuring out where you want to work, or, you know, a producer that you want to work for. I mean, like, it's how I am. Like, I will work for Janelle as long as she will have me. Like, I love working for her. I love the environment that she promotes at the company. And Lauren Bouchard is the same way. Like, them as EPs and showrunners, Nora Smith, like the way that they want these shows to run, it agrees with me. Like, I like being a member of that team. I like being here at the company. So yeah, like, do recon. Like, if you're moving out, trying to figure out where you want to work, like, do recon. I would definitely also be open to different genres. Even if you think, oh, I want to only cut something, I only want to cut sci-fi, you know, that's awesome. You will be a better editor of sci-fi if you have a base of other things.
That makes sense.
You know, everything, you can always bring something new. You can reinvent pieces of what you're doing when you finally get on your sci-fi show or movie based on experience that you've had cutting other things. So focus and specialization is definitely important to like know if that's what you want. So you always have a goal. Like think about that as an end goal, but don't say no to things that come your way just because they're not that, because everything you do can inspire you once you get to where you want to be.
Okay, cool. So, you know, can connect with people, figure out where you want to work, and have a really good base, so you can be that chameleon or work on different things and up your game. That sounds good to me. Is there anything that we didn't chat about that you wanted to share as we're kind of wrapping up now?
No, I think we pretty much covered
we covered it all.
Definitely watch Central Park.
Watch Central Park.
Yeah, we covered it all.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. It's been an absolute pleasure grilling your brain on everything editorial. And, you know, I think it's super interesting that you kind of stumbled into this, and you've also given me a lot of insight into the process that I didn't really know before. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I love it. Had a good time. Thanks.
Thank you. And if you're listening and you want to follow or reach out to Stephanie, you can do so by checking her out on Twitter under Cheerock, is that how you say that? Cheerock,
yes.
Cheerock, which
not Cheerock.
It's not Cheerock. It's Cheerock on Twitter, Instagram, or Stephanie Earley on Facebook, and I'll include all those links in the description of this chat. And thank you so much for listening. And that's all for now. Okay, bye.